In this presentation, you will learn about globalization and traditional hierarchies. India is a vast country culturally and geographically. While colonialism left its footprints, experienced even after years of independence, post-colonization period remains heavily affected by the processes of globalization. Further, India was unique in its own way for having strongly held traditional identities and hierarchies. Just as colonization interfered with these identities, globalization has drastically altered the ways in which these identities are manifest and perceived. Habib looks at the works of those literary figures who have engaged with and looked at globalization as neo-colonialism. In order to address this issue, we need to understand that globalization is also a byproduct of capitalism, just like the need to colonize was felt. With colonization came Western modernity, and similarly, globalization opened the doors to unending information explosion. Various traditional institutions, social structures, and identities got affected in the process, sometimes positively, sometimes negatively. While in some cases hierarchies and identities suffered as loss, in some other instances these became more rigid and assertive. Globalization has brought multiple hierarchies and identities in close contact. Never before in the history of mankind were the humans so closely connected. The speed required to connect to another part of the world has reduced drastically, thus influencing the way with which we think about and construct the category of others. Global identities are thus getting localized. Whether traditionally or in a modern society, religion plays an important and all decisive role. As religion gives a meaning to one's existence, globalization creates uncertainty about future. Within this context, religion has adapted strangely. In India and elsewhere, there are particular connotations about particular religions based on the global events, whether real, imagined, or politically created. Take, for instance, Islamic fundamentalism that creates a different picture, particularly after the 9/11 episode. Even before colonial rule in India, religion and caste remained very significant to the extent that concepts such as purity and pollution very deeply entrenched in religion and caste. However, with modernity that entered with the colonizers, our understanding of religious other changed, particularly the existing antagonism between Christianity, which was the colonizers' religion, and Islam, religion of some of those colonized, resulted in varied transactions between the two. Religious communalism has been a common issue, particularly in post colonial Indian society. Not just Hindu Muslim enmity, globalization has shaped and reshaped Hindu Christian issues as well. As Bauman analyzes with reference to the varied processes of globalization, Hindu Christian violence, where the curious alliance is shown of largely upper caste, anti minority Hindu nationalists with lower status groups. As it goes on to suggest, identity politics driven by the proxy association of Christianity with the impact of globalization can be seen the core reason for this enmity. Brar and al., through their meta analysis, show how the majoritarian religious intolerance displayed by Hindutva revivalists cannot be understood until we explore their anxieties about the pollution of a pure culture and civilization called India. Postmodernist minds thrive on imagined harmonious communities which always dotted India before the imposition of alien modernity. And therefore, in order to understand the politics of identity in the Indian context, one must understand the territorial aspect as well as the idea of imagination of identities. Globalization shook that unshakable belief in nationalism. Globalization also seems to have brought about drastic changes in terms of gender and work. While patriarchal values continue to govern the society, women did become a part of the workforce in different capacities. However, the structuring and restructuring of the economy didn't seem to help women achieve equality. Privatization and liberalization are known to have generated huge employment opportunities for women, but the male bias in the workforce continued in different forms, becoming more apparent at the higher ranks and positions. Although feminization of workforce was somewhat inevitable, particularly after economic liberalization in India, the overall neoliberal economy isn't very gender sensitive. Within this step, the women from lower classes and lower castes suffer the most. In that sense, globalization facilitated their marginalization even further, rendering them little or no bargaining power. In fact, because of this prevalence, many women were employed as their labor is considered cheap, as also they remain unorganized. Channa argues that the colonial rule projected Western science as the ultimate source of knowledge and Western values as supreme. Stereotypes of oppressed non Western women had their counterpart in the male, rational Western culture coming to their rescue, both metaphorically and literally. Unfortunately, these stereotypes became so entrenched in the psyche of post colonial nation builders that they and even third world feminist activists confused development with westernization. The fallacy of such an assumption becomes clear when one takes a glance at the realities of everyday life, where crimes against women and poverty and marginalization of the masses is exploding in the most urban metropolises with the highest exposure to modernization and globalization. Rational thought points to globalization with its emphasis on material values, consumerism, and thrashing of traditional knowledge. Globalization has eroded the traditional resource base as well as the knowledge and power associated with it. The situation of scheduled castes is equally appalling under the context of globalization. Jwala looks at the situation of Dalits on the three most predominant dimensions: food security, inflation, and employment, and summarizes that there exists a huge gap between the rich and the poor, specifically the Dalits. Capitalism by nature is exploitative in character. The scheduled castes are exploited in different ways in this new economic setup, which make the rich capitalists richer and richer. But one can also look at the situation differently. It is globalization that has mainly given the feasibility to some of the individuals of these marginalized sections to study specialized courses and excel in the business entrepreneur undertakings. These constitute the creamy layer today amongst their neglected and marginalized lot. This group of individuals is highly mobile, enterprising, and progressive. The credit of having achieved all this goes to capitalism and globalization that have together broken the shackles of tradition and feudalism. Mukherjee, in her Times of India article, recollects the Marxist view of capitalism as smashing feudalism and goes on to say how, at a panel discussion on Dalit entrepreneurship, moderated by acclaimed scholar and India expert Robin Jeffrey, liberal economist Swaminathan Iyer spoke of the rise of Dalit millionaires without props or government subsidies. The Economic Times ran a series of 11 articles on Dalit capitalism, says Iyer, who spoke of the manner in which capitalism has helped erode the caste system and had gone on to produce dollar millionaires. Dalits turning entrepreneurs against all odds without any outside help is a miracle of sorts, says Chandraban Prasad, political commentator and mentor to the Dalit India Chamber of Commerce and Industry. However, caste still remains and manifests itself in different ways even in today's globalized India. Jodhka also suggests that the mobility of SCs up and down the social ladder is undeniable. However, while some have fought all the odds to become economically successful, many others from SCs are suffering in the corporate hiring or getting equal opportunities. Even in today's times of digital and information age with ever increasing need for digital and online teaching aids, It is the STs and SC children who are suffering the brunt of digital divide. This is because they are not well equipped in terms of facilities and knowledge to match their footsteps with others. They are thus left behind. But nevertheless, there remains huge scope for their empowerment. Globalization does indeed create differences even as it homogenizes, but not in the positive form of encouraging genuine creative diversity. Rather, globalization creates far deeper and more pervasive inequalities across regions of the world, within countries, across classes and income groups. These inequalities encompass gaps in wealth, income, access to productive employment, opportunities, and a whole range of other material and social conditions. While the private institutions of education pose a challenge for the public ones, the prospect of ever increasing institutions, higher education particularly, can bridge some gap between the haves and have nots. With the situation, foreign universities being allowed to set up campuses on Indian soil as proposed by the new Education Policy 2020, it can give a huge setback to the public universities, and these are not driven by profits. Academically, India cannot perform better if education remains just a business or commercial activity. The aim of education, due to the mediation of globalization, should be, among other things, to eradicate poverty, promote scientific temper, ensure gender sensitivity and equality in all spheres of life. The most under researched area of study, which is the adverse effects of globalization, is public health, particularly in developing countries. While on one hand we see rapid dissemination of medicines, these are scarcely available to the poor people, but the privatized hospitals provide them easily for the affluent clientele. Not just that, the health related knowledge and information is also not spread evenly in rural areas. Such people and those who live under abject poverty still do not have a clear understanding of ailments and diseases that require medical attention. And this is despite living in an information age. Globalization works alongside patriarchy and continues to discriminate against the woman workforce. As women, socially conditioned about their alleged positions in society, they rarely exercise their bargaining power or collective force to attain equality in terms of wages and so on. Thus, globalization has only resulted in exploitation of women workers, further marginalizing them than their male counterparts. Caste hierarchies have undergone considerable change since liberalization in India. Certain restrictions have been destroyed and certain others replaced by more latent ones. Globalization has given a number of opportunities to the SCs and STs in terms of joining the workforce and becoming aware of world situation. This is mainly possible as many of them are connected to some of the social media and are becoming increasingly aware of their rights. Yet they are still neglected and exploited in newer ways in this new system of economic revolution. Thank you for watching the presentation.